What's going on, guys? So we have an interesting video for you today, and one that I want you guys to help me with. So please chime in. I'm going to run a poll on the community section of my channel to see which suspension system we should install on the Forest River Surveyor. The Surveyor currently has a suspension that's very similar to this. It's kind of a generic version of this. The big difference between this and the one that's on there, besides this one being made by Dexter, is the fact that this has a grease zerk at the very top of it. The OEM equalizer on the 2024 Surveyor is identical to this, other than the fact that it does not have a grease zerk. And that's a pretty big difference because it really changes your ability to maintain this product within the RV. Now, the only other challenge behind something like this is the fact that it has no suspension characteristics to it other than the fact that it's part of the suspension of the RV, and it equalizes the weight of the axles whenever you're, going over bumps, or whenever you're on unlevel ground, or whenever the RV is just tilted at some type of an angle. So an equalizer plays a very important role on RVs. And, I showed in a video where we actually weighed the Surveyor with different angles, and it shows how much transfer actually takes place in terms of weight between one axle and another axle at various angles. So even though this is designed to equalize, it doesn't necessarily equalize exactly. That said, this video is all about what we should put on the 2024 Surveyor. So let's talk about that and some of the challenges we may have, and why one of the suspension components here that I reviewed is not being shown right now. Hang tight, I'll be right back. Okay, so in front of me, you have 5 different models of equalizers, and they're from 3 different companies, and the difference between them all is pretty significant, other than the fact that 4 of them have a rubber bushing that they utilize for shock dampening and shock absorption. One of them has absolutely no shock absorption built into it, which means out of the 5 products that you see here, this one will have no shock dampening characteristics to it at all, whereas the other 4 will. Okay, so the question we have is, which one do we put on the Forest River Surveyor? Now, again, I'm going to run a poll. One of them I pretty much have to take off the table because it's just not going to work, and that's going to be the Cree 3000. I thought it would work, but because of the measurements, it's not, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here in a second. I don't have the Alltrek 4000 for Morite as well because the measurements on it are even larger than the measurements on the Cree 3000, and it's not going to come anywhere close to fitting as a replacement to an equalizer that has the same dimensions as this. Okay, so this is what my challenge is. If I take this equalizer and I hold it over the Cree 3000, you'll see, dimensionally speaking, nothing's going to line up. It's not even close. You see that the top hanger bolt is significantly higher. It's about an inch and a half above the bolt on the current hanger. You see that the shackle strap hanger right here is also about 3/4 of an inch over, which puts this entire assembly just way too large on this side of it. Right now, the shackle straps are at about an angle like this. So if I put this on, they'll be going pretty much straight up and down, and that is not a good situation to be in because it's not going to properly space the axles, and at the same time, if this piece rocks whenever it's on its hanger, there's a likelihood that these will actually make contact with it, and that is not a good thing. So unfortunately, the Cree 3000 is off the table. I was really hoping that it would be a contestant because it is a really, really good suspension piece. It offers a lot of movement, and quite frankly, most travel trailer manufacturers who have upgraded to a better OEM suspension system go with the Cree 3000. So it would have been really nice to actually test that on the 2024 Forest River Surveyor, and unfortunately we can't. All right, so that leaves us with these 3. So we have 2 products from Lippert, and we have 1 product from Dexter. This is the Equaflex, which I did a long video on all of these, and I talked about the pros and cons. I talked about the dimensions, how they work individually, and I featured some information on the Equaflex that I was unaware of. And that information is the fact that each one of these pieces right here can move independently of each other, which is pretty cool. So it almost acts like independent suspension if you think about it, because on all of these you can see this is one solid piece of steel that connects the shackle straps. You look at Road Armor, which is also an LCI product. This piece going across here is one solid piece. But then you get to the Dexter Easy Flex, and you also see that there's independent travel characteristics, which means this piece and this piece can kind of move independently of each other to some degree. You have this large rubber bushing that either compresses or expands depending on what your suspension is doing. Most of the time it's going to be compressing and then returning back to this position simply because you have weight on it. And when that weight is applied right here with the shackle hanger, let's say you have your spring attached like this, and it's pulling up this way, it's going to cause the whole thing to pivot that way. Whereas on this side, as it's pushing up this way, it's going to cause this one to move in. So it squeezes that really, really, really dense rubber bushing in between. And my only challenge with this suspension system is, out of all of these, this one, in my opinion, offers the least dampening and shock absorption. Why? Just because of the density of that piece of rubber right there. This piece of rubber is super, super, super hard. I almost wish they would have gone with a softer compound, or even a progressive compound, to where it's harder in the center and it's softer on the edges. That way there's a little bit more flexibility and movement here. On all of these other ones, you can actually kind of squeeze into the rubber bushing. You can actually feel that there's some give to these rubber bushings. On this one, this thing feels almost like it's a piece of steel wrapped in rubber. I know it's not, and it's definitely going to offer more suspension characteristics in terms of dampening and shock absorption versus your traditional, all steel hanger equalizer. But this one, again, is probably going to provide the least in terms of shock absorption and dampening. Now, that said, it is the only one up here that appears to be like a direct replacement to the factory equalizer. And again, this is the exact same dimensions as the one that's on the RV, and if I line them up, they're exactly the same in terms of where all of your bolt placements would go. So if I wanted to put a system in that's essentially a drop-in system that probably provides an additional 20 to 30% shock absorption versus this, but probably far less than this or this would be the system to go with, because it's a direct replacement. It drops right in. We put a set of these on the cargo trailer that we have, and I can't honestly tell you the difference because I'm not riding in the cargo trailer and I don't have something that can detect like seismic activity while we're driving down the road inside of the actual trailer. But I would imagine that it is definitely providing more shock absorption than it had we just left the standard equalizer on there. So I'm in a bit of a predicament here. Now, this right here, again, direct replacement, exactly the same dimensionally for your bolts as the factory one that we'd be taking off of the RV. Now, the second one we're going to move to is the EquiFlex. So again, I'm actually pretty dang impressed with the engineering that went behind this EquiFlex. To have that independent characteristic here where this and this can both pivot independently of each other. They're not tied together. The minute you put some weight on here, there's probably going to be a gap that forms right here because of that weight, which means if one axle is moving, yes, everything is technically tied together because it's an equalizer, and you have one single point as a fail, and you have one single hanging point here in the center. Each axle and leaf spring has its own capability to pivot its corresponding side of this equalizer because of this pivot point. It's just super cool. Again, I did not know that the EquiFlex system had a separation right here that allowed each one of these to pivot independently, because when I'm looking at it under an RV, this is all I'm seeing, right? You have to get really close to the ground to see that there's actually a gap right there and that each piece is designed to pivot independently. Now, from a dimension perspective, this actually has a narrower dimension than the one that's currently on there. As you can see, the bolt holes don't align perfectly. This one is a little higher up, and these two are a little bit closer in, which means if we put this system in place, a couple things are going to happen. First of all, if these bolts right here were lined up exactly to this, these would actually hang at a higher angle because the leaf springs would be further away from the RV, and it would kind of force them in a little bit like this. But because this is actually moved in slightly versus the OEM one that's on there, it's going to force them back out a little bit. So this should return the RV to almost its original geometry and almost its original height whenever we get this installed. When we look at it dimensionally top to bottom, you can see that that mounting hole is about half an inch higher than the equalizer that's currently on the RV. So EquiFlex is definitely a contender. So right now, EquiFlex and Dexter Easy Flex both are the contenders for being on the RV. It's interesting how they both end with flex. So road armor. I like this system. It's a pretty cool system. They have a center pivot point right here. If I flip this over, you can see what I'm talking about, which allows this piece right here to rock. And when it rocks this way, it compresses that and this bushing. When it rocks that way, it compresses this and this bushing. There is really no direct up and down movement like you get on the Cree 3000, which is one of the reasons why the Cree 3000 and the Alltrek 4000 are so desirable, because this piece right here, this entire assembly, can actually move up and down, and this piece can also pivot. So you have a lot of movement characteristics here, and on this one, it just has a rocking motion. So it is absolutely going to dampen. It is a very effective system in terms of how it works. It kind of offers two stages of equalization because of how it works, both right here as well as your center hanger. But the dimensions are just way off. I was relatively sure that this might work, but I'm having second thoughts on it, because if I take the OEM hanger, you can see we're pretty far off, right? We're about, from center hole to center hole, about an inch higher with this. And then from your shackle strap hangers, you're about 1/4 of an inch off this way, which means that not only is this going to raise the suspension up of the RV, but it's also going to cause these shackle straps to move insignificantly like this. And that is not something that I want to do. So, unfortunately, road armor is probably off of the table. I was hoping I could possibly get away with one of these two as a suspension replacement, but because of the distance from here to here and from here to here on both of them, they're not going to work. And you can compare dimensionally these two as well. These two are far closer in terms of how they're designed. The Cree 3000 is still wider in terms of hole placement right here. Quite a bit, actually, about probably 1/2 inch. And then the hanger itself is roughly the same. Nope, the hanger itself is about 1/4 of an inch lower on the Cree 3000. So the Cree 3000 is wider but shorter, and the road armor is narrower but taller. And again, those characteristics of these two will not allow them to work for what I'm trying to do. So it's really a toss-up. Equiflex versus EasyFlex. Which one would you put on? Direct dimensional bolt-on replacement, much harder compound, not as much dampening, super reliable system, super well built, probably the most well built equalizer I've seen on the market. Okay, so now that we've narrowed that down and we know that it's either going to be the Dexter EasyFlex or the Lippert Equiflex, we now have to figure out which heavy-duty shackle strap greasable wet bolt setup we're going to go with. So I have two products laid out in front of you. This first one is the Dexter product, and the Dexter product actually comes with the Dexter equalizer, at least this specific kit does. You get your suspension equalizers and you get the heavy-duty shackle straps greasable wet bolts. These things are super thick, super robust. The chances of these failing in any type of normal use, I honestly doubt. These things are super awesome. One thing that both brands do, these are Dexter and these are Moride, is that they pinch the ends right here, so whenever you tighten these down, it's more of like an oval shape at the end, and they actually kind of self-tighten themselves and fasten to the threads whenever they get fully seated, which is pretty cool. I mean, you're going to wonder why when you start to tighten these things down, they lock in place, and because of that, if you ever have to remove these, you pretty much have to replace the whole setup, at least the bolts, because you might end up stripping out the actual threads at the end. But both Dexter as well as Moride as well as Lippert with their system all do it as well. Now I don't have the Lippert heavy-duty shackle strap greasable wet bolt kit with me, but again I do have Dexter and I have Moride. So which one do we want to put on? Now I can mix brands. There's absolutely nothing wrong at all if I ordered the suspension equalizer from Dexter by itself without the kit that included the heavy-duty shackle straps greasable wet bolts, and I bought the Moride kit because maybe, you know, it was a better deal. So I could absolutely mix and match these components. There's no reason why I couldn't do that at all. A lot of people just buy the Moride kit simply as an upgrade to their RV, and they don't actually get the suspension equalizer, or maybe they have a suspension equalizer, but it came with the standard thin shackle straps that you typically see. So which ones should I put on? Should I pair the Dexter with the Dexter? Should I pair the Moride with the Lippert? Should I pair the Moride with the Dexter or the Dexter with the Lippert? What do you guys think? Those will also be options in the actual poll, and we'll determine which one we're going to install. Again, this is almost the no-brainer in terms of like a direct replacement because dimensionally it's exactly the same. This one right here is dimensionally a little different, but this has a lot of advantages in terms of suspension characteristics. They both give you some level of independent suspension capability, but this one definitely gives you a little bit more. And I would argue to say that even though this is a huge rubber bushing, you're going to get a little more movement here because the rubber compound is softer on the EqualFlex versus the EasyFlex. But what do you guys think? Leave a comment below. We're going to pick one of these two and one of these two components to put on the Forest River Surveyor, and that will be our suspension upgrade. After that, we'll be installing sumo springs, which is really, really cool. Trailer sumo springs, which are designed, again, to help dampen and help mitigate some of the shock from the road going into the RV, which is also pretty dang cool. Anyways, guys, I sure hope you enjoyed this video. Again, I will put a community post up with a poll, and I'd love to know which one you think should go on the Surveyor. Guys, if you haven't had a chance, please take a moment, subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up, and we'll talk to you again very soon.